conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Speech Analytics, the Collection Newest Alley, and the Quest for Service conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. Mr. Williams, you may begin your conference.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for attending. My name is Guy Williams. I am here with Carl Walder. I am the Vice President of Regional Accounts here at Noble Systems. Carl is our VP of Solutions for North America. Carl directs our call center analysis and speech analytics divisions. I want to thank everyone for attending today's presentation. Our goal for today is to provide you with a 30,000-foot overview, so to speak, of speech analytics, including what is it, what business problems does it solve, and we're going to highlight the different types of technologies available in the market today. We're going to go through a case study of speech analytics as it applies to the collections industry and hopefully answer any questions you might have. Now, from a housekeeping standpoint, I'd like to point out again that all callers are on mute so that we don't get feedback, crosstalk, etc. Please feel free to submit any questions by typing them into the question area in the live meeting viewer. And as we go through this presentation, I will be moderating, so to speak, and addressing questions from the audience as appropriate. So feel free to submit those questions by typing them into that dialog box shown on your screen. I'll try to ask those questions and address them as appropriate as we approach appropriate segments throughout the presentation, and we'll try and get as many of those questions answered as possible during the time we have here today. Today's webinar should last approximately 60 minutes, with the last 15 minutes of that time allotted for questions. Now let me introduce our speech analytics expert, Carl Walder.
Thank you, Guy. My name's Carl Walder. I'm VP of Solutions for North America, and I'm responsible for the professional services organization and working with our key customers on how to better optimize their overall contact center and their business models.
Okay, great. Well, welcome this morning, Carl, and why don't you begin by giving our audience an understanding of what speech analytics is and why it might be valuable to a collection call center.
Well, Guy, one of my duties is I'm responsible for doing the technology and optimization performance assessments for our large collections customers. What I do is I initially work with the executives looking at the key process indicators that they're using to assess the performance of their collections operations. Specifically, we cover how we measure liquidity, i.e. the dollars collected on a portfolio, how we measure overall costs, how much does it cost to collect the money, compliance, are our agents complying with our best practices, training measurements, have the agent received the right training, and are they applying it consistently, contact center performance in terms of call handle time, rework, chargebacks, right party contact, live party contact, etc.
So as part of your role here, you do a full analysis of what's going on in our customers' call centers.
That's exactly right. As you know, using modern contact center technology, predictive dialers, ACD, messaging, IVR, along with the collections packages, we're able to gather statistics on all of these key process indicators. As we did more analysis during the engagements, a number of questions that kept coming up that required extensive audio analysis in order to figure out what was going on was, what were the behaviors and techniques that the agents are using to drive liquidity? What was the conversation actually like between the debtor and the collector? Is the training program adequate to assure that the best practices are being followed? Have the senior collectors fallen into bad habits? Are the conversations compliant with, best practices as well as FDCPA regulations? With the traditional contact center technology, the only way that we were using to answer these questions were to, create scorecards that measure these behaviors using the digital recording packages, pull random samples of the calls, listen to each call and score them. Alternatively, we monitored the floor in real time, listening to completed calls, and actively coaching and conferencing the agents on the calls. The problem, or more the challenge we uncovered with this, was that most of our best practice customers are recording 100% of the conversations. Based on that volume, they just do not have the bandwidth to adequately monitor all the audio. In our analysis, and most surprising to us, was the impact this lack of bandwidth issue had on the revenues, expenses, and compliance. It was enormous. The lack of QA bandwidth was very common in the collections world, and the result is most centers can only monitor about 1% of the recorded calls.
So what you're saying is that most companies, most collection companies, have nowhere near the personnel necessary to do the consistently deep analysis of agent behavior in order to ensure that corporate best practices are being followed. And what kind of an impact are we talking about here?
Well, as we go through the presentation, I'd like everyone to keep in mind this question. What would it mean to my bottom line if my collectors only asked for payment 30% of the time when they had a right party contact on the phones? Based on our findings, if you are monitoring manually, your agents in general are probably only asking for payment, no more than 1/3% of the time when they got a promise to pay on the line. And you just don't know it. Because without this kind of tool, the speech analytics capabilities, you cannot know it because there's just way too much volume in recordings to analyze. And this brings us to our slide on what speech analytics is and what it does. Okay? So you can actually see the problem. It's pretty big. I've got a large amount of recordings, I've got a large volume of information, and I've got very limited resources to analyze it. Well, as part of my role here, I needed to find an automated way to do a number of things. I needed to uncover those behavior patterns and determine their effect on revenue and expense and compliance issues that were associated with the conversation. I needed to automatically analyze the collector and debtor interaction within the conversation. I needed to determine if this interaction was compliant to the collection organization's best practices. Then I needed to automatically score large volumes of recordings to gain a better coverage of what was going on in the overall contact center in the conversations. And while I'm doing all of these things, I needed to reduce the overall full-time equivalent of the manpower required to do this analysis. I could not do this manually. It literally would take me years if I had to do this kind of analysis manually. So I began researching what kind of tools are available to automate this task. What I discovered was a class of technology called speech analytics. This technology provided a mechanism to automatically analyze and score large volumes of recorded conversations in extreme detail without having to manually listen to the call.
Okay. So many companies are aware that there are different types of technology for speech analytics. What types did you find out there, and what type did you find to be the best?
As I began researching the speech analytics technologies, I discovered two types of technologies. Primarily, there is large vocabulary, continuous speech recognition, and phonetic-based search technologies. LVCSR engines do a speech-to-text conversion of audio files based on target words and phrases. This is primarily a dictionary-based approach. Second type of technology I looked at was phonetic-based. Now, the phonetic-based applications separate conversations into phonemes. A phoneme is the smallest unit of human speech, like ah, e, o, u. And phonetic-based applications create a phonetic index of the conversations versus a dictionary-based approach. The big difference I found between the two types of technology really came down to the amount of time needed in order to process the data. The LVCSR approach required my team to know what they're looking for ahead of time, build a dictionary, process the audio recordings, and then search for the recordings. The problem was if I discovered that I needed to look for something new, I needed to repeat this entire process over again. With the phonetic approach, I found it extremely easy to use. It didn't require me to train the dictionary. which can be expensive and time-consuming, and therefore was much less labor-intensive from an operational standpoint. I simply process the audio files once, and then I've got the ability to search for the new items. This drastically reduced the number of hours per the engagement. So
the phonetics-based approach was faster and operationally easier to use. So now that we've talked a little bit about what speech analytics is and what some of the benefits are, help us to understand how someone might use our speech analytics tool to actually drill down and find these key process indicators, the KPIs that show us where the business problems exist in agent behavior that are affecting corporate revenues, expenses, and compliance.
There are a number of factors that we look at from a KPI perspective. In our review of the collections environment, we consistently analyze what I like to call the anatomy of a collections call. And what I found was that no matter what type of collections, whether you're doing first-party collections, contingency, primary, secondary, tertiary, or quads, they all have the same basic call flow. Each organization differentiates themselves from the competition based on their training, their best practices, what I like to call the secret sauce. The secret sauce is, what are your specific negotiation tactics? What are your influence tactics? What are the, based on the types of portfolios you're collecting on, there's different ways to ask questions and look for different areas. So the three major areas that are common across all of the collections calling that I found are, I broke them down into three things. Verify right party contacts, live and wrong party contact processing, which is in yellow, and the right party contact process, which is in green.
Okay. Can you help our audience better understand how you might apply speech analytics analysis to each of these different types of call results?
Sure. The right party contact area requires the collector, at a minimum, to validate at least two pieces of information. This is to be FDCPA compliant. And if they're doing third-party or contingency collections, to actually take a look at the mini Miranda. Without speech analytics, primarily I just rely on traditional statistics. And then looking at those traditional statistics, the only thing we know about this part of the call is the call disposition and potentially any notes that were input on the record. Unless you actually listen to the audio, you do not know if the collector identified themselves. Did they actually gather the two pieces of information? Did they complete the mini Miranda, or at least, the primary areas of importance of the mini Miranda? If you're doing third-party collections, 9 times out of 10, you need to prove to your customers that you're doing this. Just think about it for a second. The amount of time it takes to find a good call to send them examples. My customers are large collection centers with hundreds of seats. So this can take multiple people hours and hours just to find the good recordings, that show that they're compliant. If we move to the live or the wrong party contact area, again, what we know is all based on statistics. How was the call dispositioned, potential update of information in the notes fields, and collection packages. And we all look at these disposition codes and track disposition codes and relate the disposition codes to the agents. But what we really don't know about the conversation is, did the collector ask if this was the correct address for the right party? Did they ask and update any contact information? Did the collector ask, what would be a better time to contact the debtor? Did the collector try and gather another phone number or a location for the contact today? I mean, these truly need to be asked. They're critically important to any best time to call or skip tracing tactics that they're employing. And what we were finding is that most collectors simply hang up and disposition the call without gathering, any of this type of meaningful information. Now, if we get into the right party contact, again, we've got disposition codes for payments and promise to pays. We got updated note fields in the collection package, etc. But what we don't know about the conversation, unless we specifically listen to the audio, is did the collector even ask for a payment? Did they disclose the payment amount? Did they use a strategic pause after asking for the payment? That silent time and the position of that silent time is critically important in the influence tactics of getting the debtor to play. Did the collector ask for updated contact information? Did they use the proper negotiation strategy and the negotiation tactics? Did they offer the preferred method of payment? And then why did the debtor refuse to pay? I mean, did they refuse to pay because we missed an opportunity in the conversation? So for example, there are two questions. You can ask questions in a couple of different ways. So for example, you don't know anyone who can help you with this payment. Well, this is a yes or no question. Well, no, you're right. I don't know anybody who knows it. Next. Or for nuance and influence tactics, the better way and what people are trying to train their collectors to do is to ask it a different way. Who do you know that can help you settle this debt? This causes the debtor to start thinking creatively about how to settle that debt.
Great. Carl, you bring up good points. I know a majority of collection companies are recording 100% of their calls for compliance. They already have digital recording, and we have a question here asking, why couldn't the call center simply listen to those calls, develop a scorecard, grade those calls, and then take managerial corrective action?
Guy, that's initially how we approached our top agent behavior analysis. And think about it for a second. Think about the process of scoring the call. First you need to find the call. This step, depending on your recording technology, could be very fast or very slow. For example, one of our clients is using a third-party recording system. This system does not have the ability to use the contact record data, or what I term metadata, to find the recording. So, for example, they can't actually search on find me all promise to pays and bring up just the set of recordings with promise to pays. It actually took hours for them to find examples for the right party contact recordings, to score them, and then to score them based on their technology. The next step is we actually have to listen to the call multiple times and then hope to find the behavior. Then the third and final step is to actually score the record and generate the reports. What we're finding is that each call recording takes on average, if you've got optimized recording technology, 15 to 20 minutes to score a particular call. In reality, what we found was less than 1 to 2% of the recorded calls are actually scored just based on volumes and the amount of time it takes to score a call.
Okay, so what you're saying is that if you're doing this manually, it takes a lot of people, a lot of time, and therefore a lot of money to actually QA anywhere up to 100% of the recorded calls.
That's right. You cannot effectively do the behavior or trend recognition analysis without analyzing a large portion of the recorded calls. We simply found this to be the case, and without speech analytics, it was literally impossible to do the behavior and trend recognition analysis.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what would be different if a customer implemented speech analytics.
All right, so let's take a look at applying speech analytics. So speech analytics allows collection centers to analyze digital recordings tens of thousands of times faster than the manual QA process could, and to look for more of these nuances that we just discussed. All of this allows the collector center to truly understand the collector behavior and essentially their adherence to corporate best practices in affecting revenues, expenses, and compliance.
So is it realistic to say that with speech analytics, you can find the patterns that you simply cannot find if you're manually monitoring with a typical QA group?
That's exactly right, Guy. To better understand how important this type of technology can be to the collection center, let's go through a case study highlighting the results of one of the speech analytics analysis that my team did. This analysis was done for a large multi-site collections company.
Okay, and how big was this customer?
They've got hundreds of agents spread over multiple sites. As we're doing our top assessment, I rate each company using a set of best-in-class KPI measurements. This particular company ranked very high in the best-in-class measurements because they had a very mature training process. They had very good negotiation skills, negotiation tactics, and they had great manual procedures and processes in place.
Okay, so let's go about explaining to our audience how you went about doing this analysis.
Okay. Well, we've got a structured approach as part of our top analysis that specifically identifies the key process indicators that are important. Let's specifically come back and focus on, in the case of collections, we look at the anatomy of a call. The training material that the company particularly uses to drive the anatomy of the call in different areas of the call. We then develop the queries that automatically search the audio for the specifics of the training and the best practices within the speech analytics tools. For this client, we analyzed approximately 10,000 calls. We broke it up into three primary categories, looking at first-party type of collections, contingency collections, quads, and tertiaries. We developed about 30 queries to search the audio. Let me explain what I mean by query. In this query, a query is a set of terms or words that identify what we are looking for. For example, if I want to see if some of you asked for a payment, I would create a query that says, how can I settle this debt today? Or what will it take to settle this debt today? Now, keep in mind, you cannot realistically do this type of analysis manually. The speech analytics tool is able to do in 2 hours in an automated fashion over these 10,000 calls what it would have manually taken 3.5 man-years to analyze using people. So what we found out were some very interesting and astonishing agent behaviors that directly affected the corporate profits. For example, this one component of many within the analysis, this is the right party contact investigation. This report here shows a summary of analysis of the right party contact based on an analysis of the recordings. Keep in mind that this is analysis of only the no pays and promise to pays. It includes only right party contacts. So while most corporate best practices say that a collector should always verify that they are speaking to the right party, what we found to be the reality is that only 30% of the times were the questions actually asked that verify the fact that it was a right party. To verify the address in this report, as you can see, only 30% of the time were they actually asking for the address information. Second piece of information that they should have been asking was the last 4 digits of the social. So, only 25% of the time did they actually ask for this as well.
And it would certainly put the center at risk for generating either compliance or potentially legal issues.
Yeah, so without using speech analytics tools, it would have been impossible for us to actually determine that. Additionally, we found that the collector, when they did have a right party contact on the phone, was asking for payment only 29% of the time. Again, best practice say that they should. If you got a right party contact on the line, you'd think that you'd want to ask for payment 100% of the time. So you can only imagine how much money was left on the table for this project because the agent did not ask for payment in any fashion each time they had a right party contact on the phone. I actually have estimated an ROI coming up here shortly that will give everyone a good idea of how much money was left on the table. Please notice that this slide shows the results for an entire project of the group. However, you can also capture and drill down on the individual agents for the purpose of taking corrective action.
Okay, so these reports are derived from queries that drill down into the audio recordings and look for specific words and phrases that the collection center wants to find.
Yes, but not only items that you want to find. It can also find and report on those instances where agents did not say the certain phrases or words that you were looking at. So if you want to find all the times the memoranda was not said, you can do that too.
Okay, great. So technologies can be pretty complex out there. When you talk about queries, what do one of these queries look like? I think it would be helpful for our audience to get a better understanding of that, as well as what level of expertise do you need to have in order to set these up? I mean, do you need to be a programmer or a PhD? Can you give us some overview on that?
You know, Guy, that's a question that comes up quite a bit is, most people are blown away by the statistics. And then the next question that comes up operationally, am I going to have to augment my staff to handle this? Actually, the queries are very easy to build. It's similar to using Google to find something on the Internet. Simply type in what you're looking for, and that's your query. No programming. Any call center manager or existing QA resource that really understands the operations can set up one of these queries. Results are returned in a similar way to Google, ranked as to what you are looking for. So, for example, in negotiation strategies, you can use any of these terms: set up an arrangement, try to get current on your arrangement, to get your account current for. The phonetic-based approach will not only search for these terms, but subsets of these terms, portions of these terms, and return the results ranked similar to the way Google does it. So you simply type in the sentence of the term that you're looking for, and the system will find these recordings. This type of query is an advantage of the phonetic-based approach, where with the LVCR approach, you literally had to have the exact thing you were looking for. We also analyzed whether the agents were asking for electronic payments. And it's obviously better for the call center to get their money now versus waiting for a check. So if an agent gives a confirmation number as part of the conversation to the debtor, we can find that recording and verify, that a recording was or the electronic payment was asked for. Here again, this is part of the promise to pay. And notice that only 27% of the time are we finding an electronic payment offered at this particular client. So 70% of the time, they're really not looking for or trying to drive the customer to an electronic payment.
A lot of money being left on the table. So now we've taken a look at what is speech analytics, what does it do, and generally, what kind of benefits will it bring. And we have a request here asking for an ROI, and I believe that's the next slide.
Yeah, that's correct. Let me take a look at this. Okay. As part of an ROI overview, let me outline what speech analytics meant for this particular case study. The 4 areas that we looked at were collected revenue analysis, call handle time analysis, skip trace handle time analysis, and compliance. Probably the one that stood out the most was the collected revenue analysis. If they applied their best practices in terms of asking for a payment and proper negotiation, we determined that we could increase collected revenue by approximately $750,000 annually. That's a pretty big statistic, so let's drill down a little bit on how we derive this. Each analysis is different for every client, so I want to point that out. But here's just a high-level analysis of how we determine the impact speech analytics had just on collected revenue. I want to point out 4 statistics on this chart. For no payment results, they only asked for a payment 24% of the time based on the 10,000 calls that we analyzed. Overall, this center handles about 4 million calls a month. The average collected payment, this is a first-party analysis, was about $30 of collected revenue per call. Now, you can see the number right here in the middle of the chart. For what we derived was, for every 10% increase in asking for a payment, there's a corresponding increase in promise to pay as well as the payments. Just think about it. Just ask for the payment. Collections is a very straightforward occupation, but you do need to ask for the payment. So what we found was, down at the bottom here in this analysis, if we take a look at just asking for a payment only 10% more of the time, we'd increase promise to pays about 0.5%. Based on these statistics and this volume, that would generate for 4 million calls, 2,144 more promises to pay, with a potential increase in monthly collected revenue of $64,309. Now, we multiply that across 12 months, it's $750,000. Now, imagine if you ask for a payment 20% more of the time. That's $1.5 million. If you increase asking for payment 30% of the time, it's $2.3 million. That's a significant amount of money that we're doing that. And that's profit directly to the organization without adding one additional call. Just focusing on your best practices and making sure your collectors are asking the right calls. So what we concluded was if we took a look at the specific areas that need to be addressed to drive additional revenue, we know what the specific agents and the groups of agents were doing that weren't compliant, and we could do that only by automatically analyzing the speech. We found and specifically pinpointed areas of improvement for agents, group of agents, supervisory units, or entire centers. Now that allowed us to optimize and focus our training, our coaching, and our counseling resources specifically on the areas that needed the extra help. The other thing we identified, too, is as we went through this and we did this analysis, we also identified where we could actually update the scripts, update branching logic, and negotiation strategies that could help the collectors better use tactics of influence or tactics of negotiation.
Okay, great. So the management, based on the analysis that you did with the speech analytics tool, they then knew exactly where to focus their resources in order to improve operations that directly drove bottom line results.
Exactly. That was the exciting part about what we were doing here. It's actually a pretty cool thing to do is to do the speech analytics. What you find is it's really pretty amazing.
That it is. So to summarize for our audience, the corporate value of this tool is its ability to analyze and instantly recognize agent behavior patterns that are currently impacting revenues, expenses, and compliance. And this speech analytics tool enables you to recognize and then take the appropriate corrective action to recoup money that already belongs to you, but that's being left on the table. In the case of this case study, it was literally hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that were being left on the table. And because you're able to analyze in 2 hours what it would normally take a manual QA group about 3.5 years to analyze, you can achieve these results and recoup those otherwise lost revenues. So the economics of this tool are pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only way that we were able to do it was to employ speech analytics across this large volume of data. It was literally impossible because we tried to do it with the manual scorecards and the recording and sample percentage recording and things like that. But until I started looking and applying speech analytics, I just couldn't pull out these behaviors and the analysis and the results. I mean, it's just really eye-opening what we're now able to do in our practices.
Well, Carl, I want to thank you very much for your time today and for giving a presentation on this new and literally exciting tool. At this time, we have some questions that I'd like to take here and see if we can get your feedback on them. Here are some of the questions that are coming in. What is the minimum number of collectors I would need to have in order to really benefit from speech analytics?
Let me see. I think the real threshold is based on the volume of recordings and at what point do the recordings kind of overwhelm the staff? I think what we're finding is that organizations with 50 collectors and above are really generating the type of volume that you need and will benefit from the automation. So, 50 collectors or above, I think really is the threshold.
Okay, very good. And next question, what should I expect to be the payback period for speech analytics technology?
Everybody tends to ask that, don't they?
It's all about the money.
It's all about the money. Let me think. What we're finding, as I think back on this, is once you've adopted the technology, you can really start to get a return on your investment or a recoup of what you've spent in as little of about 3 to 6 months. Again, it depends really on the volume of calls you're making. For example, when I looked at a large multi-site collection company with these people had hundreds of seats. I think they had anywhere from 300 to it was either 300 to 500,000 or 300 to 500 seats. We just looked at their sheer volume, and we pretty much generated a payback in as little as 3 months.
Okay, great. The next question we have here is technically you explained the difference between the two types of speech analytics that are out in the marketplace today, but practically, what does that really mean from a call center operations perspective? I guess the difference between the two.
I think that's a good question. Well, I'm going to answer in a couple of different ways. Not only does LVCSR processing take longer than the phonetic processing, but the LVCSR approach actually requires you to reprocess the audio files every single time you kind of like want to look for something new. So let's say today you've got a certain set of things you want to take a look at, and now your organization always comes up with daily with new things you want to take a look at. So if I kind of like come back to the case study, you don't really have to reprocess it with the phonetic approach. So let me get a piece of paper out for a second. Let me write a couple of things down. Okay, so all right, so if I looked at the 10,000 records we analyzed in the case study, if you think about it, it took us approximately 2 hours to reprocess that. Or to process it the first time, to analyze it with a phonetic approach. If I needed to reprocess that every time I needed to look for something new, that's 2 hours additional every single day. So that's about 18 man weeks per year additionally if I needed to come back and reprocess these things every time I needed to look for something new. Again, that's just on a quick scratch pad. So I guess operationally, it's just much quicker with the phonetics. So 2 hours of processing and analytics versus 18 person weeks using the dictionary-based approach.
Okay, so it's significantly operationally easier to use the phonetics approach, which is what our speech analytics tool uses. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Next question here. What kind of competitive advantage, and I assume this is a competitive advantage over other collection firms, should I expect if I install this speech analytics technology?
Let me think about that a second. Okay, so, if your agents are only asking for payment 30% of the time, and now you can drive this because now you can focus on this particular area and improve asking for payment 80 to 100% of the time. It's drastically going to affect your collected revenue It's going to improve your revenue. If you take a look at average handle time and average handle time statistics, because again, if they're more compliant with your scripting and your best practices, it's reducing the overall handle time. And it's also improving compliance and best practices. The other thing you're going to be able to do, too, is, when your customers are asking you if you're compliant, you can literally find compliance in minutes versus hours and generate them the report and generate them statistics showing exactly what you're looking for. So, you got two things. You're improving overall collected revenue. You're improving the overall operations to your collections organization. You're able to generate the reports and send back reports and compliance recordings and things like that back to your customers. If you look at a customer scorecard, everybody keeps scorecards against their third-party collection agencies. So now all of a sudden you're going to have better and improved revenue against your competitors. You're going to have better and improved compliance standards. You're going to have better and improved reporting. So this is actually going to move you up on the people that are outsourcing collections, bring you up in the top tier of their collection scorecard as well. So I think you're going to get a significant advantage, competitive advantage, when you're adopting the speech analytics automation.
Okay, very good. Well, that is the end of the questions that we have here. I'd like to thank you again for your time. I think in summary...
Well, Guy, we actually have a couple of more.
You have a couple more? Okay.
Uh-huh.
I don't see those on my screen. Go ahead and state what those are. And
Sure. Got a question, well, if your recordings are not complete, it will skew these results anyway. Our recording doesn't work 20% of the time. Well, actually, if your recordings aren't complete, you're still going to be able to break it down and analyze it based on the individual parts of the call. The other thing that we found, too, was, operationally, we're now pointing out what recordings are actually complete and what recordings are incomplete. Sometimes the agents really aren't giving you that information as well. So then it also allows you to take a look at, identify operational process areas that aren't working so that you can better focus on that. So I think, so the question is, well, if your recordings are not complete, it will skew the results anyway. I think you're still going to get value out of it because it's going to identify the area that you definitely have results. And because I can analyze hundreds of thousands of calls, statistically, if I do have problems with the recording, statistically I can overcome that. Then I've got... Okay, what is the speed in which your analytics software takes to process calls? Is this an ad hoc process, or does it need a day to work through all the calls the day before? How many extra servers will I need, extra CPUs, extra CPU muscles, etc.? This is a good question. If I looked at the two different approaches, and this was a big influence factor. We looked at the LVCSR approach, and it literally took 10 or 15 servers with multiple CPUs in order to process it, because we continually had to reprocess the information. If I look at the phonetic approach, we were literally able to consolidate these down to a single processor. We run a batch process in the evenings. That process, can basically chew through, 20 to 30,000 calls in about an hour once, all of our queries and everything's are done. So, you just put it as part of your standard batch processing, and we're able to do multiple sites, a tremendous volume of calls across it. Next, can you make the spreadsheet available after the... Oh, Guy, can you make the spreadsheet available after the meeting for review?
Certainly.
What we're going to do is we'll be, contact our marketing team, and we'll be glad to go through one-on-one, talk about your situation, and we can kind of go through the analysis in more detail. Oh, this one's a good one. Can Noble SA do real-time analysis as well as historical analysis? Yeah, this is cool. All right, it's a good question. Well, the reason, yes. So the answer is yes. We actually have a real-time component. So once you've plugged in and you've derived your queries, we actually have a plug-in component into our agent, script-based agent technology that can actually do the analysis in real time and generate automated branching rules, alerts to supervisors, automated pop-up to the agents on negotiation tactics, etc. So to answer your question, can Noble SA do real-time analysis as well as historical analysis? The answer is a categorical yes.
Okay, great. Do we have any other questions, Carl?
Yeah, we're actually about 3 minutes over. We're about 3 minutes over. So I think we do have a number of additional questions, but we've exceeded the time that we've got for the call. So.
And we have identifiers as to who asked the question, so we can get back in touch with them directly, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Well, I want to thank you for the overview on speech analytics.
I think we've got one more. I've got a latecomer to the presentation. So, where does the auditing take place? Does the customer buy the hardware or software, or are the audio streams analyzed off-site? You can actually deploy this information. You can actually buy and license the hardware or the software, or we also have an offering where we can host it, so you can actually send the recordings off-site for analysis as well. So I think that's about it.
Okay, very good. Well, I want to thank you, Carl, for the overview on speech analytics today. I want to thank everyone in the audience who spent a good chunk of time with us today to learn more about this technology. If you have other questions, please do not hesitate to send them to us. We're glad to answer them, as Carl mentioned earlier. We'll be glad to do one-on-one demonstrations and discuss how Noble Speech Analytics can specifically benefit your organization.